Elon Musk wants to put a colony on Mars. I think that's great. If we didn't have people who could think big, we wouldn't have the pyramids. We wouldn't have a lot of things. But I think the real tall pole in colonizing Mars is going to be the human factor, like acute homesickness. It'll be a new type of neuroses they'll have to create a name for. Because when I look around, I see tree-covered mountains, I see leaves are changing colors, there's flowing water, all kinds of animals, the sounds of birds singing. Mars doesn't have any of that stuff. There's nothing living on Mars. Mars has practically no atmosphere, no ozone, no magnetosphere. The dust under your feet is poisonous. Mars closely resembles what you think of when you think of hell. And whenever I see pictures sent back from Mars, I am just so glad to be living on this beautiful planet, Earth. I think it's good at some point just to lay out on the table what you believe and why you believe it. And it's so easy now just to make a video, so that's what I'm doing. And let me just start by focusing on the idea of theism and not really dwell on the Bible or the gospel, just keeping it simple on the singular topic of God's existence. And that is God, as defined in the dictionary, the eternal supreme being, the creator of the universe. And God, by the definition of the word God, is the only God. And let me say up front, I don't believe in anything supernatural. I don't believe in anything that violates the laws of physics. I have a bachelor's in physics, by the way. But I have to acknowledge that there's a big block of reality we haven't gotten to yet. It's unknown. And it's a mistake to think that either we know everything, or if something's outside our sphere of knowledge, that it's outside reality, as supernatural. And by the same token, if we reject everything outside our sphere of knowledge will never grow. Theism and atheism are antithetical. To believe either one is to disbelieve the other. Theism denotes that the universe came about through an intelligent creator. And intelligence is a variable. You can think of it as a dial going from 0 to infinity. So random design would just be the trivial case of intelligent design, where the value of intelligence is 0. And let me show you. This is what random design looks like. And this is what very intelligent design looks like.
This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres.
I contend that belief in God is the first logical deduction we make as humans. And in contrast, there's no evidence or any logical basis for atheism. And that's just my dispassionate observation. Isaac Newton, aka the smartest guy to ever live, he was a little more blunt. He said, atheism is odious to mankind. No one should believe that rubbish. But if you pay attention to some of these high priests of atheism, they'll all say, atheism isn't actually a belief. Of course, it is. It's just not a belief that can be defended with logic. And I'm nothing special. I believe in God for the same reason 90-some% of humanity does. And I really think people have to be either trained or tricked into believing in atheism. Most people believe in God for the most rational of all reasons. People believe in God because they know God experientially. And that may include their prayer life and coming face to face with the majesty of nature, or holding your newborn child, and also what an ancient prophet called the still small voice in the heart. So the percentage of people in the world who profess atheism, it's roughly the same as the percentage of men suffering from red-green color blindness. And how odd would it be if people with red-green color blindness insisted that everyone else in the world was delusional, that green does not exist? That'd be pretty crazy, right? But some of these atheist zealots, they will insist that everyone else in the world is delusional. I mean, they're very insistent with such a religious zeal. Now, it was the prophet Elijah who described this still small voice as a gentle awareness of our Creator. And it reminds me a little of planaria. He's a flatworm, and you can think of him as living on the two-dimensional surface of a pond. Say he lives in flatland. And there's something special about planaria. He's one step up on the evolutionary ladder above his flatworm friends. He has two little photosensitive regions. They're not eyes. He doesn't have a vision system. He can't see anything, but he gets some kind of input when he's exposed to light. And you can imagine planaria talking to his unenlightened flatworm buddies. He says, there's something out there. I can feel it. I believe in something called light. And his friends would say, no, man, there's no light or spaghetti monster. That's just your delusions. There's north, south, east, and west. And that's all there is. There ain't no more. And throughout history, this has been the mantra of small-minded naysayers everywhere. That's all there is. There ain't no more. And there's always more. Much, much more. We're a lot like planaria. We're a work in progress. We're not the final product. We hear a still small voice. Or put another way, we see reflections in a mirror dimly. But the time will come when we'll see face to face. It's a good analogy, but it's not perfect. Because those other poor flatworms, they're never going to see the light. Their blindness is hardwired. But in contrast, Christians believe that everyone who asks receives. To everyone who knocks, the door is open. Everyone who seeks finds. So when planaria's unenlightened buddies, they're pushing back, there's a word for it. It's called paradigm shift resistance, the natural tendency to cling to one's familiar framework of understanding. Now, unlike planaria, we humans perceive 3 dimensions plus time. We're born with 5 senses, but what we perceive is a subset of reality, like the part of the iceberg above the water. And until recently, the idea of dimensions beyond our 3 spatial plus time, that was not considered part of science, but more like spiritualism or religion. But that taboo is long gone in cosmology. I mean, in their search for this elusive theory of everything, theorists postulate extra dimensions all the time now. What's in those extra dimensions? Nothing to worry about, just the rest of the iceberg. And on the subject of shifting paradigms, we have to remember the story of Joseph Lister, who in the late 19th century had this radical idea that some sickness was caused by these tiny malevolent things called germs. He said surgeries might turn out better if surgeons washed their hands before surgery, and he got all kinds of pushback. Oh, so these are like little evil spirits floating through the air, making people sick. Maybe we need to get the help of a witch doctor. You see, the link between disease and microbes wasn't at that time something readily observable. So germ theory initially had a lot of unbelievers. But it's a fallacy to say that if you can't see something, it must not exist. There are lots of things in science we believe without directly observing. We don't, for example, directly observe Earth's tectonic plates. We infer their boundaries from seismic data, and everyone agrees they exist because we can see their effects. Same thing with black holes and historically atomic structure. Exoplanets. We don't know these things by direct observation, but by inference. Likewise, we don't directly observe the Creator, but we see His handiwork. Now, imagine, if you will, a beautiful woman, and she's married to a cantankerous old man. And she asks him to do one simple task, maybe like reaching for something on the upper shelf. And he snaps back, why do I have to do all the work around here? To which she says, well, I do the cooking and the housework, and I take care of the children, and I pay all the bills too. And he replies dismissively, that doesn't count. That doesn't count? Why does that not count? I believe in God because of the unspeakable beauty of creation, because I can hear my own thoughts and sense my own existence. I have a deep love for other people, and the wonders of this universe appear to be limitless. So don't tell me that doesn't count. Don't say, oh, well, that just serves an evolutionary purpose. Nice try. But it counts. And that's the simple logic even a child can understand. And at some point, every child will ask, in so many words, hey, where did all this come from? And if the kid is unlucky enough to have unenlightened parents, he'll get an answer like, God didn't make you. Evolution did. Don't get me wrong. I've got no problem with the science of evolution. I mean, there's a lot yet to be understood, but evolution is just another natural process, like the water cycle that brings the rain. We weren't created by evolution. That would be like saying, well, we used to think that cars were made by people, but more recently we visited car factories and now we understand that cars are made by robots. Of course, that invites the obvious questions. Yes, but who made the robots? And the answer is other robots. But maybe if you cycle through that a few times, you'll eventually get to the first cause, which is randomness. Randomness is the name of the God who made the robots, who made the robots, who made the cars. That's where cars come from. Now, you may be thinking, well, that can't be right. Somewhere in that process, there would have to be like an engineer or something, someone to design the car. Or like that movie, Back to the Future. Marty is a big fan of Chuck Berry, and he travels back in time, and he performs the song Johnny Be Good at a dance. Chuck Berry hears it, and then makes the record of it, and that's where Johnny Be Good comes from. Marty didn't create it, Chuck Berry didn't create it, and that's why it could never happen, because it's obvious that somewhere in that process, there would have had to have been a songwriter and the process of creation. Seriously, it's crazy to think that evolutionary biology makes a case for atheism. That's preposterous. Actually, Jesus spoke a lot in terms of natural selection, saying those who are not productive in a spiritual sense will be naturally deselected. And yes, the living cell is an amazingly intricate machine, actually a factory full of machines and processes. Of course it's designed. I would tend to think that design was part of the original DNA of the universe, as it was created apparently 13.8 billion years ago. I'm reminded of something Elon Musk said, that building a rocket is relatively easy. The hard part is creating the process by which the rockets are produced. So when the psalmist says, I'm awesomely and wonderfully made, it goes without saying that that also applies to the process by which we are made. And there's so many intriguing questions in biology. What is the probability of life arising in the first place on an otherwise sterile planet? I don't know the answer. No one knows the answer. It's called abiogenesis, which is a more dignified term than spontaneous generation, which we learned in 10th grade biology can't happen. The question of abiogenesis, it's been looked at from different angles, and the predictions are all over the map, so it can get kind of metaphysical. I mean, if the probability of something happening is infinitesimally small, and it happens, is that a rare event or a miracle? Or are those two concepts not entirely distinct? So with regard to extraterrestrial life, it seems like our first inclination is always to assume that we're nothing special. We're just one of many. Early astronomers believed that our solar system must be teeming with life. Johannes Kepler, who was a devout Christian, by the way, he thought there might be civilization on Jupiter, no less. Lowell thought there was civilization on Mars. But as science advances, the more we learn, the more special Earth appears to be. So we really need to follow the science. And the best thing we can do in that regard is get that outpost on Mars and answer the question once and for all, did microbial life ever exist there? We know there were bodies of liquid water there. It's kind of hard to imagine a large body of water without a single microbe, but like I say, we need to follow the science. I dig all science, and I don't think there's an anti-God mafia that dominates science. They may dominate the bestseller list, but not science itself. Because if that were true, the standard model of cosmology wouldn't start with the creation event, in which the universe, all time, space, matter, and energy, came into existence abruptly, just like it says in You Know Where. And the story of Big Bang is the mother of all paradigm shift resistance. Just a little background. In the late 1800s, astronomers started hooking up spectrometers to telescopes. And they looked at the results and said, oh, gee, this looks a whole lot like the hydrogen spectral lines, except they're in the wrong place. Oh my goodness, that's a Doppler shift. The stars are moving away from us. The universe must be expanding. And then around 1929, a physicist named George Lemaitre, he applied Einstein's equations of general relativity to the new observational data. And he found out that not only was the universe expanding, but the entire universe, all of it, emerged from an infinitesimally small point, a singularity. And that drove some people nuts, because it described what could rightly be called a creation event. And the story of Fred Hoyle, a prominent English physicist, it's very interesting. He would go on BBC and rail against Big Bang. He actually coined the term Big Bang in a sarcastic way. And he said the only reason this theory is accepted is because scientists have the book of Genesis ingrained in their heads. And these religious scientists find the notion of the universe being created by randomness very distasteful. Okay, let me stop here. The universe created by randomness. Distasteful? Yes, and completely illogical. And remember, we've already modeled what random design looks like. So Fred Hoyle championed this steady state universe, which never gained acceptance. And since then, there have been lots of experiments that have validated Big Bang, and we've mapped the cosmic microwave background, which is the remnant of that creation event 13.8 billion years ago. Of course, not everyone was upset with Lemaitre's findings. He won the Nobel Prize, by the way, and the Pope himself, he took a victory lap in a speech in 1951. He said effectively, this was scientific confirmation of the first verse in the Bible. Kind of an important verse. So by this point, the whole anti-God atheist camp, they were pretty much like Monty Python's Black Knight, with no arms, no legs, but nevertheless undeterred. And they'll never give up. Actually, at that point, they may have had one appendage left, and they were about to lose it. So going back to Fred Hoyle, later in life, he stumbled upon an amazing revelation that the fundamental physical constants, parameters, the initial conditions of the universe are finely tuned within very narrow ranges, and this is necessary for the formation of stable atoms, stars, galaxies, and life. And this is the same Fred Hoyle who didn't like Big Bang because it was so much like the Bible. And his famous statement on fine-tuning was, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and there are no blind forces or random forces in nature. And sometime in the future, I think, historians of science will look back and they'll say that was the moment they began to get it, to see the big picture. So that was 40-some years ago, and since then, a lot of work has been done on this. There are about a dozen or so of these key parameters, and the probability of any one of them randomly falling within acceptable range is extremely small. In one case, less than 1 in 10 to the 100th power. And when I say acceptable range, I mean a range of values for any kind of viable universe with stable matter and stars, etc. And at this point, there's broad consensus among physicists and cosmologists that fine-tuning is a real phenomenon. And that includes scientists with very different religious convictions. In my opinion, as we learn more, we're going to find out that it's more than just a list of a dozen or so parameters. I think we'll come to see this set of parameters as a structured and precisely defined state vector, or you might say the DNA of the universe, and that God's design for Earth and life on this planet and humankind is factored into those initial conditions of creation. You know, the term Big Bang wrongly connotes chaos and randomness with pieces flying everywhere. Actually, it was very much the opposite of that. Per the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy, or the disorder of the universe, was at a minimum at that point, and the expansion of the universe was, and is, homogeneous and isotropic. So our solar system coalesced in this relatively quiet area of the Milky Way, where there were plenty of heavy elements necessary for life, apparently from supernova. So we've had a clear shot at evolving over these billions of years. I mean, even the few extinction events on Earth have worked in our favor to bring humanity where it is now. And I think all of that derived from initial conditions. I don't think there were any mid-course corrections between Big Bang and the emergence of humankind. And not just the emergence of humankind, but the providential timeline of humanity, including metals in the earth and the energy in the earth that enabled the Industrial Revolution, then the technology revolution, and now the fact that we have arrived at these revelations in science. You know, an omnipotent God wouldn't have to make the tolerance on these initial parameters so critical. He could have made the solution space much, much bigger. And if he did, no one would be talking about fine-tuning right now. But as it stands, there can be no possible confusion. The values of these fundamental parameters did not come about randomly. And I've always liked Einstein's famous quote on determinism. God doesn't play dice with the universe. And he may be using the word God a little different than common usage, but I still like his quote. And it's also worth mentioning that randomness, in the pure sense of the word, arguably doesn't exist in the physical world. I mean, is that ironic or what? The God of atheism doesn't exist. Randomness is the God of atheism, all right? It's their answer for everything. Who made the universe? Randomness did it. Who created life on Earth? Randomness did it. And who made the little green apples? Randomness did it. I swear I'm going to write a song. But randomness sucks as some kind of God who can create anything, much less this beautiful universe. And there's a great sarcastic passage in the book of Isaiah about the absurdity of worshiping a God who has an IQ of 0. Isaiah describes a woodsman who cuts down a tree, and half of it he uses to build a fire and cook dinner, and with the other half he carves an image and declares it to be his God, and he falls down and worships it. And that's exactly the same thing as believing the universe was created by some random process defined by an absence of intelligence, something with an IQ of 0. Processes in nature are generally optimized. Even for man-made things. I mean, my smart vacuum cleaner doesn't move in Brownian motion. It moves along the smartest, most efficient path. We have smartphones and smart appliances, smart everything these days. Dumb is very, very passé. And yet there are those who insist that dumb randomness must be the ultimate cause of everything we don't understand. That's not science. That's an irrational fear. You can call it theophobia or hatophobia, but you can't call it science. The whole area of intelligence, consciousness, self-awareness, it's a part of science that's yet to be understood. And IQ is a very imperfect measurement. But whatever it is, we say generally that someone with an IQ of 130 is pretty bright, and someone with an IQ of 70 is pretty dim. But to an astronomer, those are practically the same number. I mean, roughly the same order of magnitude. Quantities in science usually span many, many orders of magnitude, but not so for intelligence. I mean, the distribution of IQ for the human population has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. And if someone's super duper bright, they'll have an IQ of approaching 200. And that would be like every now and then you hear about a child or something who's a doctor. But now imagine something that's never happened. Imagine someone with an IQ of 1,000. What would that person be like? Would they even be human? Would you want to be around them? Now let's make it 10. No, let's just think in astronomical terms. Imagine someone with an IQ of 1 followed by 81 zeros. That's about the number of atoms in the observable universe. That's an IQ of a billion, 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 billion. What do you think someone with an IQ like that would be like? And I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking because that's my IQ. Just kidding. I know what you're thinking because we've all seen the same Star Trek episodes and the myriad of other sci-fi shows about aliens with huge brains. And what we know from watching Star Trek is that when someone's brain starts evolving, the first thing that happens is they can read your mind. And later they can move things with their mind like a Jedi Knight. And the last phase is that they can create things. And that's all tongue-in-cheek, of course. I mean, TV shows are written by random screenwriters. But it's interesting that this makes a plausible sci-fi premise because we accept it. Deep down, we naturally equate godlike powers to an intellect much greater than our own. And let me speculate here, and I might be wrong, but I suspect that intelligence, especially at a level many orders of magnitude above our own, constitutes a fundamental force of nature. And like I say, that's just my conjecture, but what we know for sure is that the universe did come into existence abruptly, and that Psalm 33 says, God spoke the universe into existence. When I was little, I would say my prayers at bedtime, and I always used to wonder how God could hear and comprehend everyone's prayers if so many people were praying at the same time. But now that I'm older, I get it. That wouldn't be too hard for a God with infinite intellect. Children readily accept a theistic explanation of life because they innately believe that everything has a purpose and there's a cause for every effect. And this business of cause and effect, it's a pretty big deal in physics and in logic in general. And this really is the basis for one of the oldest arguments of theism. This goes back to Plato and Aristotle. It's called the cosmological argument. And there are several nuanced variants of it, but in essence, it's extremely simple logic. The universe began, every effect has a cause, so the most minimal descriptor of God is simply the cause of the universe, sometimes called the first cause. And the only quasi-real objection to that is the question, what caused the first cause? And the answer to that is simple. God is eternal. Can we think of anything else that's eternal? How about the number pi? Did pi come into existence along with everything else in the Big Bang, or is pi eternal? In my opinion, the whole mathematical universe is eternal. Every physical thing in this universe, including the universe itself, is in the process of decay. It's that infamous second law of thermodynamics. But numbers don't decay. There's no beginning or end. So the number pi didn't come before or after the Big Bang, it just is. And by the way, that's what Jesus said about himself. He said, don't talk to me about whatever happened long, long ago. Before all of that, I am. Which is also, by the way, the exact same way God described himself in the Old Testament. I am. So an eternal God is the first cause of this universe. And the cosmological argument is so simple, I honestly thought it was my idea. I didn't even know it had a name. But it really just speaks to the existence of God, not the nature of God, but the logic is sound. And people can come very close and even acknowledge the existence of God, but still consider God an abstraction, irrelevant to their lives. So when Fred Hoyle said it looks like a super intellect has fine-tuned the universe, and Stephen Hawking says, yeah, the universe sure does look finely tuned, you might think that was part of some kind of religious conversion, but no, I mean, not that we know about. For these two physicists, the super intellect or the tuner of the universe was just an abstract thing. You know, people's beliefs, they carry a certain momentum. And you can't just turn on a dime no matter what the evidence. And there comes a point when the concrete begins to set. I think a lot of so-called atheists really have no faith in atheism at all. I think they're just against God. And that's the team they ended up on. I knew someone who was so angry with his boss that he went around the office calling his boss an idiot, even intentionally within earshot of his boss. It's a very career-limiting thing to do. Completely illogical, but it happens all the time. And there are angry people out there who make it their life's mission to convince others that God isn't real, with a little fallacious logic and a lot of ad hominem. They have a veneer of erudition and a core of anger. And let me just say the quiet part out loud. You know, of all the mass murder suicides that happen, it seems like almost every day now, what is the one thing all the killers have in common? They all drank the Kool-Aid that there was no God, no purpose for us being here, and no accountability for our actions in this life. And the theistic implications of Big Bang and fine-tuning, that's a major impetus for a lot of alternative theories in cosmology. I said the anti-God folks don't control science. That doesn't mean they don't try. And a lot of ideas are put forward to address the so-called fine-tuning problem. But seriously, fine-tuning is only a problem if your religion is atheism and your God is randomness. This is classic paradigm shift resistance, very much like after the revelation of Michelson-Morley's experiment. You remember they were going to characterize the ether and they came up with zip? And the immediate response was, how can we cling to our belief in ether and explain these findings? And there were a lot of real kludgy ideas. Well, maybe the ether is dragged along by the Earth's motion. And it's the same thing here. Instead of accepting the determination of science, let's come up with some kludgy ideas. And there's several flavors of this multiverse idea. And they try to counter fine-tuning by saying, yes, the probability of all these parameters randomly falling in the right places may be extremely small. But there are a gazillion other universes out there where these parameters randomly fell in the wrong places. Those universes may all be cold, dark, and dead. We're just the lucky ones. And that involves some serious logical contortionism. For example, if I said, Serena Williams is a great tennis player. She won 23 Grand Slams. Someone else might say, well, not really, because I can hypothesize a gazillion other universes where everyone plays tennis, some better, some worse than her, so she's nothing special. And then I would say, now, these other universes, do they actually exist, or are they just your mental constructs? And the reply might be, same difference. Those are virtually the same thing, because my hypothesis can never be tested or verified one way or the other. Now, in all fairness, the multiverse ideas, and there may be a half dozen or so of them out there, they have mathematical basis in physics, so it's not quite as absurd as that illustration. But it's an important point that even in classical physics, we don't believe that every mathematical solution has a physical manifestation. We accept the solution that describes empirical reality and throw the rest away. And there are many areas of mathematics that have no apparent analog in the physical world. Okay, so there are also a few flavors of black hole cosmology, and the effect of these ideas is that Big Bang is one of many and nothing unique. In stark contrast, the standard model of cosmology, it's called lambda CDM, by the way, It's very well established, and as it stands, you could say it precludes atheism. The multiverse and black hole hypotheses are fringe. They're outside the mainstream, and they're not considered empirical science. And by and large, they don't meet the normal criteria for a scientific theory, like testability, falsifiability, and predictive power. But not to be completely critical, I mean, different variation of wild ideas like these come out all the time, and not all of them are derived solely to breathe life into atheism. Science is always evolving. But then again, it was Einstein who said explanations of reality need to be as simple as possible. And maybe adding a gazillion new universes really kind of goes against that adage. I mean, the simplest explanation is that God created the universe. And that is what the rational, unencumbered mind concludes. And this psychological aversion to the concept of God, it reminds me of the way mathematicians used to hit a brick wall when it came to taking the square root of negative numbers. Well, such a thing is not in our framework of understanding. Well then, define the imaginary unit I and put it in your framework of understanding. There, problem solved. Now you can move forward. Likewise, it is not logical to say, yes, I accept that the universe is finely tuned, but I do not accept a fine tuner because such a thing is not in my framework of understanding. Sometimes scientists have to learn new things. The scientifically honest thing to do would be to do what Fred Hoyle did. Draw a little box and write in it, super intellect goes here. There. I just solved the greatest problem in cosmology. And in the final analysis, people, we can forget all the theories of cosmology. The creator of the universe and mankind doesn't require that people know anything about cosmology. In fact, Jesus said people that have extensive learning are less likely to see the simple truths that children understand, like the universe, however you want to define it, is an effect that must have a cause. And if some theorist out there has no problem postulating a gazillion extra universes that serve only one purpose, and that is to make this real universe seem not so special, then I have no problem assuming that all the stars in the sky serve only one purpose, and that is so I can have a beautiful night sky. And not just me, all 8 billion of us. So the simple matter of God's existence, that's a pretty lopsided debate, but when you further stipulate that God loves his creation and that death is not final for the soul of man, that's when the discussion becomes a little more interesting. And the arguments against a loving God, although I as a Christian would claim are erroneous, they are still a step up from essentially nothing. And the emotional arguments for atheism today center around the idea that sometimes bad things happen. So let's deconstruct probably the most emotionally appealing argument for atheism. I've heard this called the problem of evil argument, and it goes like this. And I'm going to play both parts here, so bear with me. I believe in atheism because sometimes innocent children suffer and die battling deadly diseases. If there was a God, no child would suffer from disease. Okay, how would that work? When would disease start? After someone's 18th birthday? Wouldn't that create a step function and be the most bizarre and inexplicable thing in reality, that in the history of the world no child has ever gotten sick? Well, maybe get rid of disease altogether. If there was a God, why do people need to get sick? But if there was no one ever got sick, no one would ever die, at least not of natural causes. Fine, get rid of sickness and death. Let people live forever. If there's a God, why is there sickness and death? Why aren't we all in paradise right now? Well, for example, in Buchenwald, the Nazi concentration camp, there was a particularly sadistic commandant. He had a lampshade made from human skin. Should he be in paradise right now? Well, no. But if there was a God, there wouldn't be any Nazis. God could make us all good. Oh, so we would be like robots with a prime directive. Only be good, never be bad. Okay then, we'll give people free will and we'll allow sickness and death, but let continuance after this life be contingent on how people have lived their lives, like natural selection. So you're saying that if there was a God, then the world would be exactly as it is right now? Yes. Okay, that was pretty easy to win the debate with myself. Let's try one more. And this is a whole lot like the other one. I believe in atheism because in 1755 an earthquake destroyed a church in Lisbon, Portugal, and worshippers inside were killed. Okay, what was the cause of the earthquake? Built-up stress between tectonic plates overcame the friction holding the plates together. In short, the laws of physics caused the earthquake. Are you claiming that if there was a God, the laws of physics wouldn't apply to churchgoers? No. How about when a Christian buys tires for his car? Do you think that the Christian thinks that he can buy the cheapest tires because God will contravene the laws of physics to keep him safe? No. So tell me again how this event supports your belief in atheism. It's a rhetorical question. There are actually several fallacies in that argument. There's the fallacy of circular reasoning, in which the conclusion is embedded in the initial assumption. It goes like this. Assume there is no loving God and no eternal life. In that case, not living to old age would be about the worst thing that could happen. In 1755, some Christians did not live to old age. Therefore, there is no loving God and no eternal life. And there's also the fallacy of the appeal to emotion. By speaking sympathetically of children dying of cancer or churchgoers killed in the earthquake, the atheist has virtue signaled himself as being among the humanitarians, instead of where atheists would logically be grouped, among the most infamous mass murderers in the history of the world. And that's not prejudicial. It's not rocket science by definition. Atheists believe there's no accountability for their actions in this life. And they can do terrible things. In summary, life has a purpose, and knowing that we are all part of God's creation is the first step in understanding that purpose. The reason most people in the world believe in God is they have some type of experiential knowledge of God. And I'm no different. And that door is open to everyone. Above and beyond that, the evidence for theism is overwhelming and unavoidable. Moreover, there is no evidence or any logical basis for atheism. And let me add that believing in God is not equivalent to being a good person. Not by a long shot. Actually, according to what I believe as a Christian, none of us have anything to brag about. Just a lot to be thankful for. And maybe that's a topic for another day.